Now, here we're just about to embark on the Haunted Swamp tour.
Yes.
I got a bit of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert from this for some reason, with the old bus, you know, moving on.
This bus is once again in the desert, which is why the windows are so dirty, conveniently, so you can't see that there's a parking lot like behind us. And originally there was supposed to be this beautiful shot through the window of Tamara Feldman's face to establish her, but we dirtied the windows so that you couldn't see out of them, and we never got to get that shot. This was Joel's audition scene. This is how he got the movie. We had been seeing everybody that you would expect to see as the leading guy in a horror movie. All these like jocular, you know, really good-looking dudes. And then Joel walks in, and I was like, why is he here? And the casting director's like, I don't know. And I think he got 2 sentences out, and I was just like, that's the guy. We have to have him. It took about 5 months to convince everybody else. But it was probably the single best choice I made in casting the film.
So you hadn't seen the Shaggy Dog or Dodgeball that he was in? Or
no, Shaggy Dog hadn't come out, and Dodgeball I hadn't seen yet.
Right.
And now he's doing James Cameron's Avatar, because James Cameron is a huge Hatchet fan. I actually just made that up.
But it's a good one. You should stick with it.
I know, right? Okay, I didn't make that up. It's true. That was our Steadicam operator who ran away. We could not afford to bring our cast to New Orleans, so these were all the crew in the cast costumes inside the bus. And at some point while we were shooting this, we got lost in the worst area of New Orleans you can imagine. And there was an anti-abortion riot going on. And we step off in these silly costumes on our cell phones, this whole group of white people, just like, hey, do you guys know where to get the... I don't know how we got out of there alive, but we did. And that's pretty much it for New Orleans now. Everything else you're going to see in the film was in the desert, except for maybe 2 shots in the swamp of the boat moving, which you'll conveniently know the cast is always looking away from the camera, so you can't see that it's not them. And this was obviously shot poor man's process, which is how they do everything, even in the biggest budget films. The bus isn't really moving. We just have people shaking it, and we have lights spinning around the sides to look like headlights going by and things like that. But the one thing that you should always keep your eye on when you're watching a driving scene like this is that when you see Perry Shen from the front driving, the car is clearly in park, if you look at the transmission. And every movie is like that when you watch it. So that's how you know that they're not really driving anywhere, because it's in park.
Now, you mentioned Perry Shen. I actually think he's got the hardest part in the whole film, actually, because he's like 3 different characters all thrown in one. He's pretending to be somebody else, then he's not, then he's somebody else. So actually, how did you get him?
He came in and auditioned, and he did the whole transition from speaking like he's a southern wannabe black person to somebody with an Asian accent. And then Perry said to me in rehearsal, he said, you know, as an Asian American actor, I really don't like doing the whole Asian accent thing. I think it's kind of degrading. And that really resonated with me. And I was like, all right, well, what if what do you want to do then? He said, well, what if I change a 3rd time and then speak in my regular voice? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm glad he brought it up, and I think that is a good point. And as an Asian American actor, I like the fact that he does avoid roles like that. It is very hard because there's not that many parts that are written. You know, it always specifically has to say Asian. With this, though, we did say in our breakdowns any ethnicity for a lot of the parts. We weren't really trying to get a blonde girl, a brunette girl, a black guy, an Asian guy. It wasn't like that. It really just sort of ended up that way.
Do they actually do Haunted Swamp tours in New Orleans? Is there actually something? Does this exist?
It does exist. Basically what they do is they take you in a boat at night, and there's marsh gases that come up throughout the swamp, which if you watch the Discovery Channel, all it is it's like I'm not good at science, but it's something coming out of something else and it does something, you know?
Okay.
And,
yes.
And
David Attenborough, he's not, is he? Let's be honest.
And they take you out, and they make up these little hokey stories about, oh, this is where the ghost of this lives and that lives. But when I went to New Orleans for my friend Ben's bachelor party, which is why I named the main character Ben, and Ben was marrying my other high school friend, Mary Beth, which is Mary Beth in the film, they were all into basketball at this bachelor party, and they wanted to go see all the Final Four basketball games. I don't like basketball. So I wanted to find something else to do, and I found a place that advertised a haunted swamp tour. I said I wanted to go on it, and the guy said, we're not allowed to do them anymore after what happened. And the 8-year-old in me was like, what happened? Please take me out there. I want to get killed by a ghost. And the insurance was too high, and that was his answer, which is the joke that we played out with Tony Todd.
All right.
But they do these, and now we've heard there is a swamp tour that takes you on the Hatchet tour down there.
Do you get any money for that?
No.
Royalties? You should.
Somebody I know just went down there and said that on the boat they pointed out the shed that we said was Victor Crowley's house and all that stuff, and they're starting to tell the Victor Crowley story like it's a real story, which I just think is fantastic because we sort of marketed it like that when we were trying to put it together. We had this footage on the website of a guy in New Orleans telling the story back in like 1968. But the whole Victor Crowley story, it's just that urban legend type of thing. Like, everybody has him, that story of the kid who died or the kid who was done wrong and he's going to come back. It's really basic slasher 101. I mean, the whole movie the formula for this is nothing terribly new. And I love it when a critic tries to point that out to me. Like, well, in Friday the 13th, there was a guy who killed people. I'm like, thank you. What we did try to do with this, though, was they haven't made a movie like this in a long time. And I understand why. Because in the 80s, when it was working, this is John Beekler, our special effects guru. And that's actually not piss that he's drinking. It's apple juice. We wanted to do that whole sort of Crazy Ralph thing that all those movies, there's always that guy who knows better and he tries to warn you and the people don't listen. So the joke there was that they couldn't actually hear him because of the motor and they're all waving and smiling while he's saying you're going to die. This is actually New Orleans here because they're looking away from the camera.
Say more about the influences, because, I mean, Friday the 13th is one I know that you obviously reference all the way through. Kane Hodder, of course, being in it later on. So what else has it come from? You also said that you saw that Scream and Shaun of the Dead, when you saw that, you were really pleased because you could see that horror and comedy would work.
Yeah, Edgar Wright is one of my heroes, and this was written and already funded before I saw Shaun of the Dead. And there was a lot of concern, would this work with the comedy and the horror? And then I saw Shaun of the Dead, and 10 minutes into that movie, I was just like, it is gonna work. And thank you, Edgar, for kind of doing it first. Scream was a big influence because Scream to me was the first slasher movie that ever actually had a real script and real actors in it. A lot of the 80s stuff, they did not care, and they admit that. They didn't want to pay money for a good script because they didn't think the audiences cared. They didn't care about actors. They were just like, line them up and kill them. Every 7 minutes we have to have a death. And a lot of times you didn't see the same directors coming back for sequels because the studio would just say, well, why hire him? We can get some new kid and pay him nothing to do this because who cares if it's any good? And that's why those series ultimately went the way they did. So with this, I tried to take that old formula and put a script that I thought was really good and get real actors, which is why I hired comedians. Especially in horror, their comedic timing and the way that they play this off is so real really, really worked for me. And then also bring back that old latex, real effects that's done by artists. Because that's what made me get into this in the first place. It wasn't to see like, yeah, that little shed there is on the Real Haunted Swamp Tour, and they try to say it's Victor Crowley's house. If you ever go to New Orleans, it's not. Victor Crowley's house is in a parking lot in Santa Clarita, California. So that was really the spirit of what we were trying to do. And everybody who worked on this was hired based on their personality and not their list of credits. So there were some people doing key positions who had never really done those positions before, but in their interview they said their favorite film was Evil Dead 2. And I'd be like, okay, you're hired. And they're like, but I don't know what a gaffer does. I'm like, doesn't matter, dude, just gaff. Just gaff.